Today we are diving into the wild story of a man whose ideas were so radical, so dangerous, that the most powerful institution on earth hunted him down, even after he was already dead. This is the story of John Wyclif, and it starts with a truly bizarre act of revenge.
Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1428. The Church issues a very strange, very gruesome order.
Now, here's the thing. The man they were after, John Wyclif, had already been in his grave for 44 years. Yeah. He died of a stroke, a pretty quiet end for a guy who'd caused so much trouble. But his enemies, they were far from finished with him.
So on the Pope's direct command, officials go to his old parish. They dig up his skeleton, build a pyre, burn his bones to ash, and then throw what's left into a nearby river. It was literally a symbolic execution, performed on a man decades after he died.
Which brings us to the big question, right? What on earth could a philosopher have thought or written that would make people go to such extreme lengths? What made his ideas so incredibly dangerous?
Well, to get why he was such a threat, you have to understand that John Wyclif wasn't some nobody shouting from the sidelines. He was the ultimate insider, a brilliant, highly respected philosopher at Oxford University, the absolute heart of the English establishment.
I mean, just look at his career. By 1372, he's a doctor of divinity. That's the top of the academic ladder. He's advising the king, going on diplomatic missions. He's one of the most brilliant minds of his day. But then you see the turn. By 1377, the Pope condemns him. And just a few years later, he's kicked out of Oxford. His prestige just couldn't save him.
So what happened? What was the switch? Believe it or not, his entire rebellion, every single controversial thing he said, all comes from one single core philosophical belief. If you can get your head around this one idea, you've got the master key to his entire worldview.
And that idea is called philosophical realism. Now, the definition sounds a little abstract, but stick with me, because the implications are huge. For a realist like Wyclif, when you say a word like truth, you're not just using a handy label. You are pointing to a single, real, eternal thing that actually exists, like an idea in the mind of God.
Now, his opponents, the nominalists, said the complete opposite. They argued words like truth are just names, convenient labels we use. But Wyclif, he believed that if a universal word exists, a universal thing must exist. For him, this wasn't some dusty academic debate. It was about the fundamental nature of reality itself.
And this is where things get explosive. Wyclif takes this philosophical conviction of his and aims it like a cannon, directly at the wealthiest, most powerful institution in Europe, the Church.
Following his realism, Wyclif's logic just unspools into this radical blueprint for reform. See, if truth is a single divine thing, then its purest source has to be the Bible itself, making Scripture superior to any pope. And if the Church is a real, universal concept, it can't just be the flawed political institution he saw around him. The real Church must be the invisible community of all true believers. And this led to his most politically explosive idea.
It all comes down to this one devastatingly simple quote. A man in sin has no right to dominion. Think about that. He's saying that a corrupt priest or even a corrupt pope has no legitimate authority. This was a direct assault on the Church's vast land holdings and political power. It was basically a green light for kings and nobles to seize church property.
Now, for a while, Wyclif's powerful political friends, who kind of liked the sound of that, protected him. His attacks on church wealth were useful. But then he took his philosophical realism and applied it to a core spiritual belief. And in doing that, he crossed a line. This was the point of no return.
His target was the doctrine of transubstantiation. This is the central Catholic belief that during Mass, the bread and wine literally transform into the body and blood of Christ. Attacking this wasn't just politics anymore. This was a spiritual declaration of war.
For Wyclif, the problem wasn't really theological, it was philosophical. His logic went something like this. 1. The substance of a thing, what it truly is real. 2. Its accidents, how it looks, tastes, and feels, are also real, but they can't exist without their substance. So, his conclusion? If you can still see and taste the bread, the substance of bread has to still be there.
To Wyclif,
This meant the Church's doctrine was a philosophical impossibility, an absurdity. He was saying the central miracle of the Mass was illogical, and that was the step too far. It cost him his powerful protectors. From that point on, he was on his own.
So he was forced out of Oxford and died a few years later. You'd think that would be the end of the story, right? But no, the Church wasn't done with him because his ideas had started to spread, and the institution had to fight back even if it meant fighting a ghost.
And the response was just methodical. In 1382, they condemn his teachings. Then, decades later, in 1415, a major church council orders all of his books to be burned. And then, finally, another 13 years after that, comes the ultimate command: dig up the body and burn it too. It was a desperate, systematic attempt to completely erase him from history.
But it didn't work. It completely backfired. You can't burn an idea. Wyclif's arguments, and especially his call for an English Bible that normal people could read, spread like wildfire. They jumped to Bohemia and inspired the reformer John Huss. They laid the groundwork for what would, a century later, become the Protestant Reformation. That's why today he's known as the Morning Star of the Reformation.
So that leaves us with this final thought. Was John Wyclif a failed heretic whose story ends with his ashes being tossed in a river? Or was he the first spark of a revolution that would change the Western world forever? You have to wonder, by trying so hard to erase him, did the Church actually guarantee his legacy?